All right, so the good news, everybody, is that it's July. It means you've now survived half of 2020, which has already been filled with biblical plagues of locusts, murder hornets, a global pandemic that's resulted in more than 130,000 deaths, the complete defrosting of the North Pole, and the Siberian forests, which are now burning at an uncontrolled rate, and they normally don't even thaw out. So that's just the first half of the year. So if you're thinking, wow, I made it through that, cool. I should be in good shape for the rest of the year. Unfortunately, after dealing with all of these pandemics and global issues, uh, y'all are going to have a little problem here because we still have to deal with capitalism. And it's the second half of the year, so capitalism's going to come roaring in. Don't believe me? Let's take a look. Eviction time, everybody. And not just one or two evictions, massive evictions. Let's get you up to speed real quick on what's going on, and then we're going to tell you why it's happening and what the horrible end result is going to be. Legal aid groups and housing advocates are bracing for a surge in evictions as local governments begin lifting moratoriums that deferred rent payments for millions of tenants who lost jobs in the pandemic. When the CARES Act was passed, the thing that sent you that one random $1,200 check like 4 months ago, part of that was a national moratorium on evictions up until July 1st. Now it had certain there were certain levels and standards that had to be met, so it didn't qualify for everybody. But a lot of local governments then stepped in and said, yes, no evictions at all. We're going to have a complete moratorium until July. Well, it's now July, and people are bracing for impact. In Michigan, where the state's set to lift the eviction moratorium, there's been a 76% spike in calls to the 211 call center that provides social services to those most in need. Nationally, the call volume has jumped 200%. A lot of tenants living in fear day to day, not knowing if they're going to receive a stimulus check, not knowing if they're going to receive an unemployment check. They know that date is coming when legally they know their landlord will be able to get a court order to officially evict them. They know they're not going to be able to pay that money. For example, in Memphis, there's a backlog of 9,000 eviction cases when hearings resumed last month. In Milwaukee, eviction filings spiked 15%. And in Columbus, Ohio, they converted the city's convention center into a housing court because the wave of upcoming evictions is going to be that massive, okay? Again, a convention center. In many ways, the wave has already begun. We need to work to stop it from becoming a tsunami. We're running out of time. We're seeing now, really frankly, horrifying confluence of increasing evictions in states where new coronavirus cases are surging. Now, there are a whole bunch of different reports out there, but most reports essentially put the at-risk population of people who are going to be evicted in the next 6 weeks or so between 20 and 26 million people. And that's just people who are on the lease. So in instances where you have an entire family living in an apartment, it will be a lot more than 20 million to 26 million renters. It's going to be upwards of 40 million people on the streets like that. Here you go. Cities and states where eviction moratoriums have ended have seen a jump in proceedings to eject people from their homes. The eagerness to reopen eviction courts goes along with the eagerness to evict people. Virginia and North Carolina have reopened eviction courts and have thousands of cases filed in the last few weeks. To be sure, landlords need to receive income from rent to cover their own expenses, such as cost of mortgages, building maintenance, and property taxes. That's why advocates are arguing for federal assistance to help renters afford their bills. Now, we already know that's not going to happen. We're still a little busy giving billions and billions of dollars to corporations and Catholic churches that have recently been bankrupted by sexual allegations and paying out hundreds of millions of dollars in damages. That's where all the federal money is going right now. It's going to corporations, it's going to churches, it's going to large-size businesses that are all getting PPP loans through loopholes built into a program that were essentially placed there purposely so that larger businesses could steal all the money before small businesses could. You know, small businesses, the ones that are owned by the people who live in the houses that are all about to get evicted. Those people. Yeah, it's almost like they're getting screwed twice. Now, if you're saying, oh, well, this just sounds like a whole bunch of hooey. This isn't really happening. Oh, it's not happening in my neighborhood, therefore it's not happening. Well, let's check. Let's see where it is. Thousands of Floridians facing eviction this week. Evictions can now resume in Virginia. Thousands could be at risk. End of eviction moratorium in Pennsylvania leads to concerns of sweeping homelessness. As evictions resume in Texas, unemployed renters have few options. Eviction surge in North Carolina as pandemic protections expire. Now, if you're thinking to yourself this sounds familiar, and you feel like you've lived through this before, chances are you have. Back in 2008, during the subprime mortgage crisis, essentially what happened was everybody who was living on the margin, i.e. people who overbought, people who could barely afford their mortgage, but they could still afford it month to month so that they could chase the American dream of home ownership and owning property, all those people got wiped out in like the first month. And as time rolled on, more and more people were evicted, and all those homes went back to the banks. The banks, instead of putting them on the market, bundled them together and sold them to large financial holding corporations who have now included rental properties as part of their portfolio. So in markets that got hit exceptionally hard in 2008, like Las Vegas, Phoenix, Austin, Atlanta, what happened was essentially thousands of houses went off the market instantly. Poof, gone, like that. And all those houses that were for sale just vanished from the market and became rental properties. And what happened was the remaining houses on the market surged in value even more in a depressed market because there was much less quantity to be purchased. What this did was destabilize those local housing markets, make it even more difficult for working class people to afford homes, and essentially created a larger renter class. It's not like there were more landlords, there were just a lot more renters. We've never seen this extent of eviction in such a truncated amount of time in our history. We can expect this to increase dramatically in the coming weeks and months, especially as the limited support and intervention measures that are in place start to expire. About 10 million people over a period of years were displaced from their homes following the foreclosure crisis in 2008. We're looking at 20 million to 28 million people in this moment between now and September facing eviction. 2 to 3 times more people are going to become homeless from this than they did during the 2008 subprime mortgage crisis. And what you're dealing here with is a confluence of events. A lot of people losing their jobs. People only getting one check from the government. People who are going back to work having reduced hours because the businesses are open less and have fewer customers. This is going to continue. Even if all the states magically reopen tomorrow and all the businesses reopened, they're not going to get back to the volume they had back in January and February. Ergo, labor is going to continue sliding backwards, and the number of people who can afford a mortgage or who can afford rent are going to continue to decrease. And it's going to be a much smaller market of people who can afford these things. Want to know how bad it is? That's okay. I got that checked for you too. Many renters and homeowners with a mortgage already struggle, even in a world with government support. Census reports that during the 2 weeks from June 11th to June 23rd, 18% of renters, 12% of homeowners with a mortgage didn't pay their rent or mortgage. Many of those having trouble paying their rent or mortgage already lack regular income. Only 50% of struggling mortgagees who couldn't pay their mortgage in mid-June had some regular income. Half. That is a staggering number, compared to 80.6% of mortgagees who paid their mortgage. In other words, the people who paid their mortgage are people who still have a shit ton of money and can afford to keep paying their mortgage. The people who struggled on their mortgage are people who are already at the margin and in threat of losing their home from now until the fall. Among struggling renters, an even smaller share, 40%, had regular income, compared to 65% of renters who paid their rent. As permanent job losses and long-term unemployment quickly rise, many renters and homeowners will continue to struggle paying their bills. Families having a hard time paying their rent or mortgage already rely on government assistance. For example, 30% of renters who didn't pay their rent used stimulus money to pay their bills, and 20% relied on unemployment. Among people with a mortgage who are struggling, 32% used stimulus money, and another 19% had unemployment insurance benefits, which, by the way, are now expiring. Worse, many renters and homeowners who so far have paid their bills rely on government support too. Among renters current on their rent, 28% used stimulus checks, and almost 18% used unemployment. Among people with mortgages, 21% used stimulus money, 11% used unemployment. This is not going to get better. This is only going to get worse. People who have been able to pay their rent have been dipping into their savings, have been living off their credit cards, have been borrowing money. The number of people that you could borrow money from keeps reducing every month the less money there is out there. Fewer people working, less income, less money circulating through local economies, the more broke people there are going to be. And the first thing that happens is landlords kick out their tenants. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, why would you kick out your tenants if there isn't a surplus of renters out there? There's a number of reasons. Number one, you can apply for all sorts of federal assistance once you're a landlord and no tenants come into your building and your building lies fallow. You can also, with no tenant, more easily sell your property to a real estate developer who will then build condominiums and luxury McMansions because there's still a market for those, because the number of people with a ludicrous amount of money has not fallen. It's just the people who are at the margin who could barely afford to pay their bills. They're the ones who are massively falling off the radar. More than 1 in 5 renters who are paying their bills went deeper into debt by using their credit cards and savings. This was similar among renters and mortgagees. More worrisome, more than 1/3 of struggling mortgagees went deeper into debt, 31% dipped into their savings. That is 70% of all people with a mortgage went deeper into debt or had to pull money out of their savings, which means that roughly 30% of people who have a mortgage can comfortably pay their mortgage. Now, as it stands, home ownership is roughly between 50 to 60% in America. And then the number of people who actually own their home outright out of that 50 or 60% is infinitesimally small. More than 80% of homeowners have an active mortgage right now. People with one property who have one mortgage, they might have a chance. The more family that becomes unemployed, the more people that move in with them and can get side work. Yeah, maybe if we start stacking 10, 20 people to a house, those people might get to stay in their houses. People who have extended and bought a house just to be a landlord, to have rental income, yeah, they're all going to lose their properties. And to those people, I say I have absolutely no sympathy for you. You are part of the problem. Purchasing a house just to have rental income drives up the price for everybody. You don't have a real job. All you are doing is being a pass-through between a working class person who can't afford to buy a home and a bank that owns a bazillion homes. You are part of the problem. I have no sympathy with you for you losing your rental property, your Airbnb, or whatever the hell it is you invested in that caused everybody else to have to pay more to own a house or to make home ownership well outside of their reach. For people who are struggling, who have their one home that they are living in, you have my sympathies. And I wish I could tell you that there is a government plan or, a magical silver bullet that's going to come out of the gun that is government that is going to kill the werewolf and save you. I cannot say that. In the next 2 to 3 months, hundreds of thousands of people are going to become homeless. And by the end of the year, with no help from government, that number is going to be millions. Millions more unemployed, millions more who are homeless, millions of homes that are going to be unoccupied, hundreds of thousands of which will be bought up by financial investors, not to flip and resell, but to form large real estate management companies and create an entire industry out of expanding the renter class by having even fewer people who can own homes. This is pretty much where we're at now, gang. Start watching, start paying attention. If you're on social media, start looking up evictions keyword every day and plug in, because in neighborhoods across America, people are banding together now. They are forming coalitions. They are manning homes 24 hours a day to keep sheriffs from posting eviction notices. There are rent strikes in action. At this point, it is going to be a battle of wills, because if it turns into a battle of resources, disparaged members of the working class, off by themselves trying to stave off the inevitable, are going to lose. Solidarity, everybody. Solidarity is a verb.